Work session to order. Chair Trainee has assigned me to chair this meeting since I'm the one whose constituents came up with the questions. I'm Harriet Drummond, West Anchorage Assembly representative. Do we need to take her for this?
I would go around and
May as well.
Yep. If we
she was here.
go around and introduce.
Paul Holman, Assembly.
Patrick Flynn, Assembly.
Harriet Drummond, Assembly.
Debbie Osiander.
Jennifer Johnson.
Chris Birch.
Dick Trainee.
Mike Gutierrez.
Marty McGee, Assessor.
John Weddick, Deputy Assessor.
And Ms. Craig Jackson is here somewhere.
Just saw her
She
recently.
just went out to do an interview, so.
Okay, I have a group of constituents in West Turnagain who raised significant questions about their assessments and have been communicating with the assessor's office over the last few weeks. I have some questions from them, but I think I'll let the assessor give his presentation first. Anybody in the audience, there's a pile of them on that front table if you'd like access to that. Mr. McGee?
Thank you very much for trying to get our
Thank you.
presentation up here.
If
You all have a handout. Every slide in the presentation is in the handout.
Excuse me.
First of all, I want to assure all the members of the Assembly that we in the Assessment Division take our job very seriously, and we are very aware of the impact of what we do on individual taxpayers. Changes in value are, especially large changes in value, have a difficult consequence for individual taxpayers. But our mandate, our charge, is to protect all taxpayers by fairly and equitably valuing property, every piece of property in the community. We operate in an environment with a non-disclosure of sales in Alaska, and that causes us to have voids in the information we have available to us each year. We also have a legal mandate that every year we evaluate the property afresh, anew. It doesn't matter what the value was in the prior year. That's not part of the equation in terms of how we estimate the value each individual year. Obviously, the information that comes to us is different from year to year. And I'll give you an explanation of how our valuation process works as part of the intent. Now, information in this is not going to be specific to any individual appeal that we currently have open. I've been advised not to discuss the individual appeals. The information, or better part of the information, probably will be included in individual appeal packets as we go forward, but this is a general overview of what's happened, what goes on, what the basis for that change is. Now, on the easel behind you is the same picture that we have on the slide, and I know it's difficult to read because of the size of the area we're covering, but what we call CALP, which is computer-assisted land appraisal or land pricing, is the program that we use. And each one of these different colors represents a different market neighborhood used in the land valuation modeling. And the area of interest that's a particular focus right now is this area right up here.
Correct.
And basically what's happened is historically, and this is prior to my entry into the arena of being the assessor, probably associated with the collapse of property values in the late 1980s and the recovery, a decision was made to create a separate land model for property north of Northern Lights Boulevard and west of McKinsey Drive, roughly. Then the rest of the Turnagain area north of Northern Lights Boulevard and extending further east. And probably the impetus for that, I speculate because I wasn't here when that happened, but probably the impetus for that is we know the collapse, the recovery occurred much quicker in certain areas of town. Certain neighborhoods recovered value much faster than other neighborhoods. So probably the impetus for this division between the two marketing neighborhoods was that property value recovered very quickly in the east part of the Turnigan area and not as quickly in the west part of the Turnigan area. But also one of the things that comes out of that, it's a heritage thing, is that there have not been a lot of transactions. This is a really stable, developed neighborhood with an old subdivision. And so it was not abundantly obvious from the sales, especially raw land sales, because there basically isn't any raw land in this immediate vicinity, that property value was increasing as fast in both of these market neighborhoods. So it lagged. So on one side, it was easier to observe that the land value had increased fairly rapidly. Now, we are also at a point here where we have had almost 15 years of land value or property value increases in excess of 10% per year. In the last 2 to 3 years, that slowed way down to where we have land value or property value increases which are relatively level, stable, and about 1 or 2% per year. All of these factors kind of come into play as to why land value lagged on one side, why we weren't aware of it until fairly recently, and why we had to make a change. And so we'll go through the basis for that in the next few slides. Go ahead, Jerry. Now, this is not the only area of town that's had a fairly significant land value change as a result of our work. In any given year, we have 3 or 4 subdivisions or areas of town where something like this happens. The story is the same every time. It's a disclosure issue. It's unknown information which becomes known to us and makes it obvious that the value needs to be increased in order to be equitable with the other property owners and assessment for other property owners. So these other areas of town and these other affected property values are shown here, and that's a relatively common occurrence. The other thing, and it addresses a question that was directly asked, why didn't we give the people in the neighborhood a heads up about this earlier in the process? Well, it's an annual process. We do a lot of work right at the end of the year, and that's exactly what happened in this situation. The work was done. It only became evident to us that this change needed to be made in like late November or December of this year. It really didn't give us time to work a process of going out into the community, talking to individuals and explaining what was going to happen and why it was going to happen. That really we have to issue the value and then work that explanation process through the appeal process, which is unfortunate, but it's also not uncommon. Now,
Marty,
in these...
excuse me, I have a couple of questions on this slide.
Okay.
I'm going to ask them. Mr. Flint?
Actually, just a real quick comment. First, I'd like to welcome Mr. Trainer, who brought this to our attention, and note that when he listed our various per square foot property values a couple weeks ago, mine was the highest and appears to be justified right here. That's all, Madam Chair.
Mr.
I don't have a question on this slide per se, I have a question.
Okay, I'll wait. I'll wait then. Go ahead, Marty, thank you.
Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. Now, in the greater Turnigan area, I need to show you a different map here. We have one following in the slideshow, but I also have it on a poster board here. And this is all the way from the creek west. There are 836 properties in that area. Only 65 of them are vacant lots. There are 771. The remainder are improved properties. This is real common for Anchorage at this time. Very few vacant sales, vacant lots even to be considered as vacant land sales, let alone transactions. There were 90 sales that occurred because we know that from the recorded deeds. Only 51 of them are known to the assessor's office. So we know of and documented the sale price on about half of the transactions that have actually occurred. 23 of those sales, when we set the value, we knew that the sales were above the assessed value. Since we target the median or the middle of the range of value in sales, we know that some of the known sales we are overvaluing relative to the assessed value, and some of them we're undervaluing. So we're shooting for the middle, so that's normal. We have discovered, after we issued the valuation, 18 additional sales, which will be used in any modeling we do next year. And they are relevant to any appeals that we're hearing, so we don't ignore those as existing, but we didn't know them when we set value. And on this whole neighborhood of 836, 30 properties are appealed currently. Go ahead. So this is a picture of the land valuation groups in that area. And you can see one group there is in this color, and those are all large lots that have frontage on the inlet. And there's a few over here on the creek too. Similarly, large lot. They're very high value. They're in a different market group. The majority here, and this is after we did our work, are in the same price models. And this area right here is the West Turnagain area that we're kind of focusing our attention on. This is McKenzie Drive. So all of these over in this area are what the attention's focused on. And these other ones here, these are duplex zone lots. And so they function in a different market, and they have values that are, all of them have values that are, represent what we know have been sales in the area of land. As well as we've done work on the relationship between the land value and the building value. So we'll go on to the next slide. So this is now focused on just that West Turnagain area, just this area right here. What's going on with that? There are 234 pieces of property in that area. 11 of them are vacant. 223 of them are improved. We know that 16 sales occurred. Known improved sales, there are 14. Sales above the assessed value, so the sale price is higher than the value we set on the property, 6 of them. Newly discovered data, we basically had...
I'm leaving down at 1:30.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. We basically had 7 sales as we began the process prior to January 1st. So we got 6 back in, and there are 28 appeals out of this 234 individual pieces of property. That's just a profile of what the status is and what's going on. Now, in our valuation process, it's a repetitive process. So the first part, we're using a cost approach on all of these single-family residential homes. The first pass we make is we do a called assessment ratio study. We check the assessed value against the known sales. And right here, based on the information we had as we began, we knew that we were at 89% assessed value in relation to sale price. That's too low. The most properties in acreage are in excess of 90. Our professional standards, we should have all of the model value between 90% and 110% on this type of property. So it goes above 100% is acceptable in terms of our professional standards established by the International Association of Assessing Officers. By the time we were done and we had issued out the value, we were at 100% given those 7 sales. Now this property is located in Market Cluster 1, which is a large market cluster. It's typical single-family homes, which go all the way from the port area to Spenard, and all the way east to Fairview is all included in Cluster 1. Our mean ratio is 96% in that cluster. The median ratio is 95%, and the weighted mean is 96. And this PRD is a measurement of low value relative to high value, which says that we have don't have prejudice in the way we've done it. That's what 1 means. And the coefficient of dispersion is a statistic about how much variance there is about the mean. And again, that's within our standards. That's telling us we're doing a good job of valuation of the property. Now, the larger homes, which are really, they're by rate of construction is the way we define them, occupy these lots. They're in a different cluster. They're in Cluster 9. And that's a universal cluster that covers the entire city. So high-value homes or high-quality homes are compared to high-quality homes, not typical average homes. Same thing with duplexes. They're in a different cluster, so they're not compared to single-family homes. And condominiums, anything else is done in different market clusters. And we have what we call market neighborhoods, which are underneath the cluster, which this Turnagain area fits into a single market neighborhood. So that's why we changed the value. So we work our process We go in there and we first do this ratio study. We look at land value. We say, what do we know we need to do to the value for all property in acreage in order to make it match sale price every year? And we set the land values first. And then we come back in and we add in the improvement value, and then we compare it again to the known sales. And we say, whole value, what does the value look like? If it's too low, we know we have to change something. So then we look at what needs to be changed. Is it the value of the improvement or the value of the land? Now, basically, the value of the improvements is done in the cost approach so that every plywood box that's exactly the same anywhere in Anchorage at a beginning point has the same price on it, the same value, replacement cost. And then it's adjusted for whatever specific features the house has and its location. So there are adjustments made to reflect local market areas for everything. So once we have the improvement values pretty well set and equitable treatment of all property owners, we don't like to go in and adjust the improvement values a lot if we should try to match up with those sale prices. The explanation is the land value needs to change. And that's what we found here. Even though we only have 3 sales of vacant lots in this area in recent time, it was obvious that the land value in this West Turnagain area needed to come up and needed to be equitable with the rest of the Turnagain area. There isn't any reason why lot values over here should be different than lot values over here. Size, of course, is taken into consideration. Location is like a corner lot is taken into consideration. Lot shape is taken into consideration. But the same adjustments are made to these lots as are made to these lots. Now you'll see we have divided this up into increments of land value here. But our models don't work. They don't jump. They're not stair-step models. I'm showing this. This is the way our land valuation models work. So you can see down here we're talking about the size of the lot, and here we're talking about the value of the lot. And you'll notice the slope of the curve changes. That's because the first part of the value is really important. There's a lot of change in there. But once you have a house lot, once you have a lot you can build on, then the extra square footage doesn't come in at the same price. It comes in at a lower price. It's called law of diminishing returns in economic terms. So the larger the lot gets, the less the additional square footage is worth. It contributes to the value of the lot. So you can see that these land models are linear. They link together. They don't stair-step. Looking at that, you might think that the land values are significantly different between one color and the other. They're not. They're very similar because the difference is in the size of the lot. It's just accounting for differences in square footage. Go ahead. Now this is a total value map, and this shows you what the total value, land and improvements, is on different individual lots in this area. And again, you can see there's a lot of equity as we have set value this year. That a home over on this part of the Turnagain area is very similar to a home over on this part. And it's different than a home up here, which are high value homes. The value is indicated, the value matches what we know about sale prices of these. The one thing that's significantly different, one reason there's different coloration here, because some of these are vacant lots. And all of these require seismic work, they require special foundations, they require quite an investment before you get to a place where you can build a house on it. So the dark blue ones are ones with houses on them, that work's been done, and the lighter colored ones are the vacant lots that work hasn't been done yet. And you can also see there's a difference in valuation of these lots, which are higher value view lots and so forth. Next. Okay, now we're going to show you something. We show the same information in these, we call these comp sheets, but they're a grid of known sales, and the sales are compared to a subject property. And the computer creates these for us, but they demonstrate quite a few things. This information is available, a truncated version of this is available online, and the full version of this is provided to any property owner that acquires or appeals their property value. So this is shared with them. The computer will select the comparables from our pool of database, and it seeks properties which are the most similar to the subject property it can find. And so you can see here, as you look through the first few lines here, But these are all ranch-style homes, same type of construction, relatively the same year of construction. The number of bedrooms and baths is similar, and the total size, finished living area, is very similar. And there are some differences, and adjusts for that as we go down through this process. This one, for instance, doesn't have a garage, it has a carport. Some of them are different in size. The subject is 1152, and this is 992. So, and then when you come down through that, and this printed out over here, which is a little bit easier to read, when you look at the cost data over here, you can see that our estimated cost is relatively similar once you take into consideration the differences of the individual houses. So there's shows a replacement cost no, and it shows a depreciated cost. And then to complete the cost approach, you take the land value, which is shown here, and once again, these lot values are relatively similar. Now, 2 of these on this particular comp sheet are inside the affected area, and 2 of them are outside of the affected area. So you can see on both sides of the line, the value of the house, the total property value, and the value of the lot is very similar at this point in time, after we made these changes. And they also match up to the actual sale price.
Marty, is the market cluster somewhere on this?
Displayed.
Is it on this sheet?
It just shows the 102 is the neighborhood group within cluster 1.
Yeah, so this information right here
Right.
is telling you that they're in the same, or is similar. These 01K00 are the
It's the
ones.
neighborhoods,
Yeah, that's the east side of Turnagain.
but they're all in the
west.
102.
Okay, so market cluster 1 doesn't show up, but some other sort of further refinement of.
Yeah, and the way the computerized program works, it selects the comps. First, it tries to find a comparable sale in the same market neighborhood and similar to the property. And if it can't find that, then it goes out to the cluster and it searches a bigger database to find comps.
That's why the comps are on the hillside, right?
Well, it can happen, especially with those, I mean, our review of these, we review these a lot as we set value at the end of the year. Our review of these is pulling good comps on all of the properties we're talking about. When you get in that cluster 9, which is an area-wide cluster, then it'll pull comps from strange places trying to find a house that's physically similar.
I think the issue with mine is that I think it'll be only new construction within a half a mile square radius.
Yeah. So whenever something's different, it pulls strange comps, and we have that kind of discussion with people all the time. But our value is not set based on these comps. I mean, it's not exclusively. It used to be. The method we used before, the value would be derived. We would be using this value down here, and it would be derived directly from the comparable sales. But we don't do that anymore, although there is still a close correlation between our indicated value from the cost approach and from the market sales. And one reason we shifted from that is to stop variance in value from year to year, because we had too much variance going on as it used new comps every year. So using the cost approach will cause that to stop and things to settle down. But when there's a large change in land value, there's a large change in this wheel. Go ahead. So what have we got to work from? We have 6 private fee appraisals that have been provided to us at this time, came out of this whole process. Private fee appraisers are not required to do a cost approach, and they're not required to do a supported land value on their appraisal report. 4 of those 6 appraisals, they did put an indication of land value in there, but there's no market data and no analysis to support that land value that they put in their report. And in 2 of them, there's no cost approach at all on the appraisals that we have provided, so there's no information to work with there at all. We were contacted by a homeowner who was concerned on Westwood Drive, and he had 2 properties, which he had recently refinanced, so he had appraisals on both of those properties. And this is a quote from his letter, his communication to us. It says, at first he was upset with the land value change, and we asked him to review that in his appraisal reports and then get back with us. And he said after looking at his appraisal reports, he had nothing to complain about. He went away, he didn't appeal his property. Now, he did not provide us those appraisals, even though we asked for them. So we don't have that information, whatever was contained in his appraisal reports we don't have in our database. But now, there is a low sale, and what do we mean by a low sale? We're not saying this is an invalid sale. We have included it in our database, but the sale price was as shown, and the assessed value was as shown. And that property sold 9 days after being listed on the market. And we think that's an unusually short market time, but it isn't enough to disqualify it entirely. And whenever we work with data, we know some sales are on the low end of the scale and some are on the high, and we regard this one as on the low end of what market value is. There are 2 listings in this immediate neighborhood, and their information is shown here. Both of these are very unusual houses for the neighborhood. One of them is incomplete. It isn't a finished house. It's been foreclosed on by the bank. It was originally listed as shown here, $949,000, and that's what we knew about the time we set the value. That listing has been reduced to $849,000, and so forth. And then there's this other listing, which is an unusually large house, 8 bedrooms, 7 full baths, and 2 half baths. And it has not sold, and the owner who's listed the property has not reduced their listed price. And our assessed value was below what they're asking for that property. It's been on the market for quite a while. Right. Utility easements. This neighborhood is affected by at least 2 utility easements that have been kind of problematic for us. And why wouldn't we know about a utility easement? Well, one of these utility easements is an electrical utility easement for overhead lines, which is not shown on the plat. This is an old subdivision, so the plat was filed in the 1960s or late 1950s, I don't remember which, so that the known easements then would have been shown on the plat. This particular electrical easement isn't shown on any plat. It's a recorded piece of paper. In our system, we rely on the data that's in the system, and this data would have been entered into this system in the computer program prior to the one we're currently operating. So far before 1986. So unless somebody comes to us and says, there's a problem, we have no reason to go back in. There's no replatting action, there's no legal action that's occurred, no recorded document that it makes us aware of something that we didn't know about. So that's one of them. The other one is a sewer easement that runs diagonally through the subdivision. So it cuts across a whole tier of lots sideways. And under review, and when people ask us questions about that, we determined that we had not adequately addressed the impact of that easement on the value of the lots affected, and we changed them all as a result of the work we did. So people did not have to appeal their property to get that adjustment. We made it to every lot that was affected by that easement. And similarly, if through our research we can determine what the impact is of that overhead electrical easement, and if it's similar, we will make the correction to every lot that's affected by that. Now, citywide, and this is something that's recognized by virtually every appraiser in the city, overhead utility easements tend to have very little impact on the value of the individual lots. What you can observe is people buy and sell lots for about the same price, which are affected by overhead easements and are not affected by overhead easements. As long as there's room on the lot to build a house and use the lot in the normal way, it doesn't diminish from the value. But we're reviewing that, and if an adjustment is warranted, we will make it. So that pretty much covers the information that we had presented, and I want to just go over the points that we were trying to make here, that we're mandated to treat all taxpayers equitably. When we're aware of an inequity that is shown by the market data, we have to make a change to reflect that. Otherwise, the allocation of the tax amongst taxpayers isn't fair. It isn't fair to the other guys in the city who are paying taxes. We are a non-disclosure state, and the effect of non-disclosure is things come to us in fits and starts, and it's difficult on an annual basis. I often characterize our job as something like trying to build a watch wearing blinders and mittens. The expectation of the public is that we are extremely accurate with regard to the value, and the reality is the data we have to work with makes that difficult. but it's not impossible. And so we work within the limits of the information we have and the tools we have, and we try to make it as fair as possible. And we have to value property in equity with other taxpayers. And when we observe that houses sell for about the same price on one side of the street as the other side of the street, it doesn't matter what the assessed value was last year, we have to make the values match. And that's what we did in this particular subdivision. So that's what we have is prepared information, certainly available for question.
Thanks very much, Mr. McGee. Mr. Hahnemann.
Mr. McGee, thanks again for appreciate, and I know I've worked with your office on a couple of issues, and certainly I've been at many community councils where you or someone from your office have been there, and it really helps to be able to effectively communicate. And each time I hear your presentation, just as today, I learn a little bit more about the process of the assessment. And I do know, I just wanted to point out, I guess, for the folks that might be in the audience that don't understand, we're guided by, as a municipality, we're guided by state statutes as to how assessments are performed, correct?
That's correct.
So, it's not like the city cannot operate independently and decide to set values and such. It's pretty much.
That's right.
And I did have a question. In this particular neighborhood, and of course, the gentleman came last meeting and gave us a breakdown of square footage and such. Using this category where you know market-based valuation, equity, and fairness. I've got a gentleman, and I've had him in. We haven't yet to get into the office together to sit down, but he's having a similar concern, and he made a purchase, I think, 3 or 4 years ago with an actual property appraisal that was done by an independent company. How long are one of those documents active or used, or how effective are they?
Well, our policy is to adjust value to that appraised value or the closing price for 3 years, and it's plus or minus 10%. Now, as we march through time, and within those 3 years, we will time adjust that documented value consistent with everything else. But we pay attention to that, and so it's possible we will adjust value. We do a lot of those in the informal review period.
And overall, and of course, as you described, each neighborhood has its different price lots. The lots may be different because of size or where it's located, or different uniqueness to the section of the subdivision.
Right.
But overall, if I'm talking, for lack of better terms, a 10,000 square foot lot, no matter where it's at, a 10,000 square foot lot in general went up about 1.6 to 2% or 3% over the last 3 years.
Right.
Per year.
That 1% value increase is predicated on the idea that we matched market value at the prior year, if that's true. But certain places, like some of them we talked about there, the Terraces subdivision on the east side of town, there was a lot of sales data we weren't aware of. And so its value had to increase significantly more than 1% to match what we now know to be documented sale prices.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Elvin. Mr. Birch, I'm sorry. Elvin, go ahead.
Well, you might want to hear from them first, but thank you, Madam Chair. But since Mr. Trainer's in the audience and brought this issue to all of our attention, I was just wondering if it's appropriate to ask what his thoughts are after this lengthy thank you, by the way, Mr.
I actually have a list of questions that Mr. Trainer passed on to me.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
And due to the thoroughness of this presentation, I'm trying to work my way through the questions and see if they've been answered before we go there. So just give me a minute.
I need to leave, but I just wanted to thank you for a great briefing and thank Mr. Trainer for being here as well and bring it. It's always good to learn, a little more of the process. And I have to agree with you that sometimes it seems kind of remarkable that we don't have access to some of the sales data, which would certainly make it easier. But I know I've heard pushback on that from folks as well. Where are we at as far as I posed a question about just accessibility of data? Do we know, or is it possible to get the kind of the large data files? I think I was referred to Kenai Peninsula Borough. I think they've got a mechanism where you can actually download whatever I know we can go in on an individual basis and then look up individual properties, but is that data out there in a format or a means?
Well, I know you asked me a question about that, Mike. via email earlier, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry I didn't respond. They don't really make their whole data set available, to my knowledge, in Kenai. I needed to check in with Kenai and make sure what their current practice is. But in general, the way they defend their appeals is not with individual comparable sales, but with the statistics for the market group that the property is located in. So the kind of information I gave you, having to do with the median value, the assessment ratio, and the variance, would be the kind of statistics they would typically present to defend an appeal in Kenai. And so they do a different methodology in terms of how they interact with the public.
And you're still assessing the
Well, we can
potential for
certainly-
public access to.
Yeah, we can make that available, and there's no reason not to. It's a little difficult to get all the programming in place. But the other challenge of doing that is that how many people understand statistics sufficiently to glean something meaningful out of that. We feel printing these comp sheets like that is more directly responsive to people to show them these are real sales in your neighborhood of houses similar to yours, and this is why we think the value we put on your house was correct.
Well, I sure like the graphics too. That's very helpful for, to visualize some of the comparables too. Well, great, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Rich. Okay, I passed out a sheet of questions that were passed
Actually,
on to
Madam Chair, I thought I had gotten on the queue at the beginning of the meeting.
Oh, I apologize.
With regard to my own property, this is not a subject that I've paid a tremendous amount of attention to until after the last meeting, when we got a list of what various properties owned by the several assembly members are assessed at per square foot. And I'm perplexed that and I'm not arguing my assessment. I'm perplexed that my land in a high crime, high density, low income neighborhood is worth 10 times more, or assessed at 10 times more, than a beautiful piece of land on a lake on the hillside. Could you explain to me how that can be possible? Because it strikes me as bizarre.
Well, if your characterization comes from strictly a comparison of the price per square foot of your lot to somebody else's lot, the price per square foot, I'm not saying is wrong. The information is correct, but the conclusion is wrong. Because if the total value of the lot or the total value of the property matches up with what lots and improved properties sell for in your neighborhood, the devaluation is correct. And so the comparison is not, it's an apples and oranges type comparison. If you do it strictly on my lot's at $7 a square foot and yours is at $20 a square foot basis. And it is our focus, it is our mission to have the total value of your property match up with known sale prices of property similar to yours, what other people would pay for.
So isn't the lake lots have higher value?
Not according to the assessments, no.
Well,
It's assessed at one of our assembly members is paying a little over $1 a square foot. The others are paying $2 or $3 a square foot, and my neighborhood is 10, or at least my lot in my. And again, like I said, I'm not arguing my assessment. I'm arguing the disparity. It doesn't seem to me like we're necessarily assessing those other properties at their full value. I'm not saying mine should be lower. It just seems odd to me that there is such a disparity. I can understand to a certain degree Mr. Flynn's because of the neighborhood in which he lives. It's certainly a much nicer neighborhood than the one I live in. But I'm not convinced.
Elvie?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a comment or a question, I don't know, maybe it's both. But, and I haven't run the numbers myself on the property accurately. But Ms. Drummond mentioned the fact that my square footage, cost per square footage or value per square footage was high, but I have a small lot. So there you have it.
right.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Marty, your global modeling and practice chart helped me understand why that is the way it is. My constituents' questions, let's see, question number 4, that compares Bill Sheffield's property at 55,000 square feet I don't know the average size in the Westwood area, but I would say it's 10,000 square feet at the most. 8 to 10,000 square feet. So in other words, the way this global modeling appears to work, it's the first 8 or 10,000 square feet of each lot is valued the same way. So Sheffield's might be worth the same per square foot as the Hood Court properties, but then because you don't need any more land to build a house on, as you increase the number of square feet, the per square foot value goes down.
Yeah, the total value doesn't go up as fast with the, and it's exactly right. The zoning basically sets about 7,000 square feet as mandatory for a typical R1 home. And so when you add additional square footage to it, you can't build a second house on it. And so the amount of value that's contributed by that additional square footage goes way down. Now, Sheffield's house, and if you look at his specific assessment, is $382,000 for the land. So that's significantly higher than the value of a single site in Westwood, on Westwood Street. And that's, so it's adjusting for those things.
Unless he had chosen to build a significantly larger house.
Well, and there, the
It's
additional
already
value
pretty
comes
big.
in the house. You know, so we would capture that and do, it's over $1 million, I think, in the valuation of the total property. So that's the way that works.
Madam Chair, if I may, do you take into account factors such as crime rate, or does that ultimately get reflected in sale prices when you know about them?
Well, I think it's reflected in the sale prices. And we try to use sales from the immediate area. And so whatever the market feels, you know, the market is reflecting the impact of something like high crime rate, high traffic area, you know, poor views, whatever the adjacent use is, if there's an adjacent industrial use or something like that. The market is telling us what the impact of that is on those properties.
And you only get the sales price on a voluntary basis.
That's correct.
I see you have listed prices, which is what's advertised, but you don't necessarily get to know the sales price unless
That's
it is
right.
volunteered to your
In
office.
the current year, we know less than half of the sales that occurred. Now, we pay attention to the listings because they also are an indication of which direction the market's moving and what's going on in the real estate market. But we don't use the listings to directly calculate the value.
Okay. All right. If we could look at these questions real quick, Marty. The first one, number one, about how land value increases. I think you've pretty much explained that
Okay?
in your presentation. In two, about informing the property owners of an increase.
I think you addressed that too. End of the year, it was an anomaly.
Right.
Okay, thank you. Same thing with three, regarding the easements. And four, we just talked about. Five is an interesting one. 3 vacant lots.
All three of those lots were vacant at the time of sale. When we were using them as an indication of vacant lot value, they were vacant. 2 of them have been built on since. 1 remains vacant.
Okay. And how do you learn that? Through the building permit process?
Yeah,
You're
we also
building
just drive
office.
neighborhoods to see if construction has occurred, but yes.
Okay,
Well, if I might,
go ahead, Paul.
are these similar size lots, the all three of these?
Yes, the trend kind of is that in the eastern part of the Turnigan area, the lots on average are smaller than the ones in the western part, but yeah.
So going on at plus or minus 10% that you quoted earlier, and I see the difference between 200 and 290 is somewhat substantial. I mean, it's about 50% if you,
We're talking about specific,
well, like the lower lot on Lower Baranoff and the upper lot at Forest Park,
yeah.
there's a substantial difference there. I mean, the plus or minus 10% goes out the window on that one.
Well, I didn't characterize it that way. The difference here is in the size of the lots. It isn't the plus or minus 10%. But what I said is if you bring me an appraisal or a closing document that's within 10% of the assessed value, we adjust to your closing document or to your appraised value.
Because I was thinking that plus or minus 10% on these averages of each unit. You talked about the high and low end and then the middle.
Right, individual lots will vary more in terms of their assessed value than 10%.
I think that's what causes most confusion, at least in the constituent case of mine, a couple of cases where I've had,
Right,
is they sold a house, it was taxed lower than the appraisal and sale. But then they bought a house, it was sold on the appraised value, and the assessment the next year went up $40,000, which is just under a $250,000 purchase. And then that got straightened out by just bringing down the documentation. The following year, it went up another $30,000 in assessed value. They bring back the appraisal, there was a little bit of a mashing, they adjusted it. The third year in a row now, it went up yet again for $30,000 or $40,000. And yet all around, the market is at 1.8, 1.9, 2% increase. He said if that was the case, no issue. But it keeps just going in, and it's the same lot, it's the same home, and I'm thinking the market is somewhere around 2 to 3%, even per year.
Right.
So 3 years out should be 6% increase. And
The problem we're bumping up against there is that there was a reason why our system, our process estimated the value where it did in the first place.
right,
And, part of the theory with this adjustment is that if more market data comes in, it would correct to closer to his sale price.
right.
But evidently that market data hasn't come in. So now his sale, in our opinion, is a low indication of value. It's in our database and we're not ignoring it, but if we're shooting at the median, it's down there at the bottom. And so our valuation process keeps wanting to bring that value back to the median. And there isn't any other supporting market data coming in to support that his value should be lower. So as we march forward in time, that at first we accept it, and we give it to him for 3 years, hoping or anticipating the market data will come in and somehow support his sale price as being a regular indication of
Well,
value.
viewing that same train of thought, while on that, what if the market's telling you that your numbers in the median's a little too high, should the median come down?
Well, if we have other sales that come into the system, then it will bring the value down.
Right.
And that does happen.
Right. So that's, I just was
Yeah.
curious because I know.
Because occasionally we have the same story, there are a few people and they get very frustrated and angry over the process as a result. But the answer is that, overall, the market data is not supporting their value as being the best indication of value. They got a good deal on the house they bought.
But 3 years later, when they go out and pay another $600 for appraisal and the numbers are similar with maybe.
Well, that's a fresh appraisal and we would do it. And one of the things we get when they give us an appraisal is we get the comparable information that appraiser used to set a value. So those supporting information comes into our system too. Enough of that happens, it definitely, 1 or 2 sales influences these market models quite a bit.
Right.
So having the data come into the system often brings them into alignment, but sometimes it doesn't. And so that's what happens.
All right.
In other words, people should be encouraged to give you information to help you.
It benefits not only
To help
them, but the
advocate.
other property owners, the other taxpayers by doing that.
Okay, items 6, 7, and 8 are roughly related. You didn't speak a whole lot, you spoke a whole lot to the land valuation, but in terms of the structure, the improvements,
Right.
can you address that a little bit? How is it that the land increased so significantly? I understand that part because of the comparables, but the structures appear to be decreasing while the land is going up.
The structure part of the value begins with using replacement cost estimates. So current data about what it costs to build buildings, as well as cost guides like Marshall Swift. That's the basis for our replacement costs new in our system. And the depreciation part of it that says a 1960s vintage ranch home is worth a lot less than a brand new one comes from the market also. So it's a comparison between what the old house sells for, old houses, similar houses sell for, and what new houses sell for. So that's where we get this depreciation component that should equalize things. Now, we do that for all, like I said, we do that for all the houses in Anchorage. So we don't do it, it's not so narrowly defined that we do it just for a specific local market neighborhood. We come up then with a value of the improvements in an independent process, and we add that to the land value. Now, if we do that, and like I said, we do this in several iterations as we go through the modeling process. So we add what we think the improvement value is, which applies to every house in cluster 1, to what the land value estimates are, and then we compare them to the sale prices. And if that ratio is still telling us that we need to increase value by 20%, the conclusion is we need to increase the land value in order to make the sale prices match, and so forth. Now, this rule of thumb of 50% of value, we're certainly aware of that, but it isn't any kind of law. It isn't any kind of actual, you wouldn't find that in any appraisal text that says you have to, land value can not be more than 50% of the value. And really what it is a qualifying tool inside certain lending programs that says if I'm a lender, I'm Fannie Mae, and I want to lend on property, I don't want to lend on property where the building is old and worn out and it's underutilized. I want to lend on property where the building contributes the normal amount of value to the total property. So they don't want to lend on property where the land value is more than 50% of the total value. Now, we're aware of that because it affects people and they're qualifying for their loans. Now, our assessed value does not automatically qualify or disqualify you from an assessment, a loan application. A private appraisal is what's used to do that. So their conclusion of what land and building is what's relevant, not what my conclusion is. But we're aware of it. So we study that every year and we consider whether the land values and the building values are in correct proportion or not. And if, in fact, we need to increase building values, and so that land value is not as important in the total value, we make those changes on an annual basis. This area needs study along those lines. I acknowledge that, and it will be looked into again as we do the 2012 valuation process.
Okay.
That's good.
Mr. Harmon?
I didn't even realize that we had more questions on the back, which I think I addressed as I was questioning earlier. It seems to me, Mr. McGee, and I know that we're bound by state laws and we have to be followed within the parameters and all that, but just with your last statement, it seems more like a policy and you're keeping within what sounds to be banking standards or lending standards and such. But it seems to me that if we're using market value, and particularly if you're trying to find a median number here, that perhaps, absent the absolute mandatory reporting of sale, that perhaps going to the realtors or a group of realtors, whether it's a blind call from someone in your office or a bunch of volunteers doing it at a certain time of year to make sure that somehow or another you can kind of get a temperature gauge of what at least the asking price of a house in different neighborhoods would be, so that you can kind of come up with that median price you're looking for. You know, sometimes the asking price is higher. It's like a new car. I'm not going to walk away from a car dealer paying what's on the sticker price, but some other person might, so that median is going to be that range we're looking at. Well, so it seems to me like that might be a way to look at it, because again, years ago, I used to be able to use the assessor's number and say, well, we know it's about 80 to 85%, so my property's going to be worth a little more. And in the cases where I'm seeing lately, this is just not the case. The appraisal comes in sometimes much lower than the assessment.
Very close. Now, that's why we pay a lot of attention to listings. So that's one way that we get that kind of feedback. And there are quite a few realtors in the community which we talk to every year directly, even though they won't formally give us data as a group or transfer information from MLS. We do talk to them, and we do try to monitor what the reality of the market is that way.
Okay, let's see.
Madam Chair, I apologize, but I have to depart.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Jerry. Question number 9. I guess that's the way the process is set up. If you want to appeal, you appeal, and if you don't appeal, you don't get adjusted.
Right. And if an error, like when we discussed plat error or an error associated with interpretation of the legal restrictions on the use of the lot through easements or other things is discovered, we make corrections to those errors. They don't have to appeal to get those corrections. So if individual property owners come to us and say, hey, you overlooked this, you should have, we take it into consideration.
Okay. Oh, regarding the easements, it occurred to me earlier, there's a lot of overhead lines in this town that are slowly being buried.
Right.
What does that do to the easement? The easement just transfers to the underground version?
Typically, the easement is exactly the same, so it doesn't change.
Just because you plant shrubs over it. So, okay.
Right. Now, in terms of how the market reacts to having the lines buried versus overhead, we'll wait to see. I haven't got anything that tells me that that's affected value yet.
And number 10. I didn't get the impression that our property values increased by 18%. I thought we would have had a huge outcry. I'm not sure where that number came from.
I can't validate that either. What we said in our report to you and the mayor is that the typical increase is around 1%, the average increase. So I don't know where it came from.
I thought it was more like 1%,
I just-
1.6%.
Yeah, exactly, and I just gotta say, going back to that couple constituents I've had, is it's probably that computer thing that you're talking about that bounces back every year that says, I don't like that low number, this is the number we like. And it has been, in a case of this $240,000 sale, or $230,000 sale, the assessment comes in at about $260. So over, the gentleman that already acknowledged that, yeah, I understand some increase. If the increase was 5,000 or 6,000, they could see it, but 30,000 or 40,000 doesn't seem right. You can't drive those numbers.
And in those cases too, if there is something to do with the physical description of the property that causes that discrepancy, so we inspect the property and we determine that it isn't built to the same quality, or there's a unfinished area or something that explains that, then we change our physical description of the property and that will not happen. It'll stop bouncing back up. But if the only thing that's driving it is just market data in the system, and a sufficient amount of market data doesn't come in to support that sale price as being correct assessment, it bounces back.
And you just have to keep adjusting it until the market catches
Right.
itself.
Okay, so that might have been a typo.
It looks like it.
Maybe it was one.
There might be a decimal point missing or something.
I'd love to see the source of that. Our meeting actually needs to adjourn since we're only noticed until 2 o'clock, but if members of the audience want to stick around and speak to Marty or his staff, Mr. McGee, I would appreciate that if you would.
Sure.
Any objections?
Motion to
Meeting
adjourn.
is adjourned. Thank you all for coming.
Sorry, I forgot your name.